The nation will hear from President Biden today on the administration's planned response to the Omicron variant. It will take a couple weeks to figure out how much of a threat this thing really is. And the last thing anyone needs now is mindless politicking. But has that stopped people? Of course not. Texas Congressman Ronnie Jackson, a Republican, labeled Omicron the midterm election variant and claimed Democrats are using it to win elections. And on Fox TV, in reference to Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg in his comments, the U.S. needs to tackle the pandemic before it can solve the supply chain problem. Listen to this.
And now we see these new variants. So that's the answer, is more lockdowns, more fear. And therefore, he doesn't have to do his job of fixing the supply chain because we'll just keep this whole thing going.
It's always a new variant.
And you'll count on a variant about every October, every 2 years.
I'm joined now by S.E. Cupp and John Avlon. S.E. is a CNN political commentator. John is CNN senior political analyst and author of Washington's Farewell and Wingnuts. How about that for sober analysis, S.E.?
Well, listen, Fox is a drug, man. And that doesn't happen overnight, where three people who are intelligent, who've been around a while, who have done this for a while, I know those people, decide, well, I've got a big platform. I'm going to say that a very dangerous new variant 9,000 miles away.
Potentially dangerous new variant.
Potentially dangerous new variant 9,000 miles away is the invention of an American political party that has somehow convinced the host country, the WHO, NIH, and all the other countries doing lockdowns to believe in this, which sounds bonkers. It sounds bonkers. And yet, all three of them kind of in unison, oh yeah, just very cavalierly joking that this is probably a political invention. It is irresponsible, but that's the floor. I mean, that's evil. That is evil, to get up and tell your viewers, don't worry about it. It's probably just made up. And so don't believe any of the other science. Don't believe about vaccines or boosters or anything else, because it's probably just Democrats. I don't know another word for that.
It's certainly beyond cynical against a backdrop of 750,000 Americans dead. And a lot of these folks do know better, but they're playing to the cheap seats or they're playing to the C-suites. There are two scenarios here. But look, you got someone like Dr. Ronnie Jackson, who one day will also figure out what happened to that cat, who's a doctor, who's the one saying this is a midterm election variant. Pandemics don't care about politics. We should know that by now. So let's have more of an actual fact-based conversation, which involves communicating like adults and not just trying to scare the hell out of everybody and find partisan advantage in people.
It's also absurd to think that any Democrat would think this helps them. I mean, that in and of itself is ridiculous. The other thing is, this is going to be about science. Either this is a real huge problem or it's not. Let's hope it's not.
Yeah.
But let's not spread lies while we're waiting.
Well, John knows this as well as anyone. There used to be moments of, over the past 100 years, very intellectually rigorous debate within the conservative movement. The rise of neoconservatism, for example. People like Irving Kristol and Ayn Rand, and even Barry Goldwater, having really interesting conversations about what the movement is. The project of the Republican Party today is real simple. It's dumb in its simplicity. It's two parts. Ready? Part one, tell people they're aggrieved. They might not know it, but they are aggrieved.
Sure.
Part two, tell them who's to blame. So Anthony Fauci is to blame. Big Bird is to blame. Ilhan Omar is to blame. Democrats are to blame. You might think you're happy, but you're not. You're aggrieved. And here's who is responsible.
Yeah.
That's the only project. And it keeps repeating and repeating and repeating. And it's working in condensing the base. It's not growing the base, but it's certainly making them more rabid and loyal and susceptible to nonsense
Sure,
like that.
Because you keep people addicted to anxiety and anger. And look, I mean, that project goes back to the Southern strategy, too, so I don't think we want to be Pollyannish about the past, but at least there was a degree of civility and substance. That's out the window right now. So I think what we need to stay focused on is, look, you mentioned the fact that we don't know what this new variant holds. We do know that scientists seem concerned. It seems to be a high degree of communicability. We don't know the severity. And we live in an interconnected world. And so the impulse to project your fears or to polarize for profit off this stuff is almost irresistible to people who have a financial interest, frankly, in this polarization. Yeah. And it's difficult to combat that kind of onslaught, this disinformation industrial complex that exists. But that's what responsible actors and journalists need to do. And it means that we're going to have to wait and see without freaking out.
Well, that's a challenge, right? I do think the lies in the idiocy aside, which is what all that is.
Right.
I think it's a challenge for this White House today. How do you tell the American people, we're going to have to wait 2 weeks to find out if this is nothing to worry about or if this is going to be a real problem that evades vaccines? That's a tough sell. That's a pretty high bar, yes?
It is, but you know, here's a crazy idea. Presidents of the United States should talk to their fellow citizens like reasonable adults, right? You know what? Might be lost on a lot of folks. It may be easier to try to just play the base politics and scare the hell out of everybody and try to find someone to, as he says, you know, you're aggrieved and here's who to blame, the us versus them game. But actually taking the risk of talking to people eye to eye as opposed to talking down to them might actually work. And that's what Joe Biden needs to do, understanding, and the administration needs to understand that first of all, they're facing a huge disinformation amplification machine that are dominated by bad faith actors who profit off this stuff. So they need to be at least as loud and as clear, but actually putting the focus on facts rather than fears.
But there has been this idea in the Biden administration to kind of ignore the crazy, not to feed into it. I think Biden needs to call this out and say, what you just heard on Fox is insane. It makes no sense. It's bonkers. And take it on head on instead of just pretending it's out there in the basement. It is not. It is above ground.
Can I ask then what you make of this back and forth between Dr. Anthony Fauci and Ted Cruz, or Ted Cruz and Dr. Anthony Fauci, because I want to know if this is what you're talking about. Let's play some of this exchange. It was on CBS.
Senator Cruz told the Attorney General you should be prosecuted.
Yeah. I have to laugh at that. I should be prosecuted. What happened on January 6th, Senator?
Do you think that this is about making you a scapegoat to deflect from President Trump?
Of course. You have to be asleep not to figure that one out.
I mean, it's a shame that a public health official is put in a position to have to kind of take on that kind of criticism, but absolutely. I mean, Tony Fauci is not above reproach. He is a public official, and he should be held accountable for the things he does and says. That aside, that's not what Republicans are doing. That's not what Ted Cruz and Rand Paul are doing. They're not holding him accountable. They're making him the avatar of all of your grievances because nothing matters and they don't have to prove it. So that Tony Fauci is getting on television and saying, that's crazy, and look in the mirror, Senator Cruz. I think you need more of that.
Yeah, you got to call it out. You got to play offense with facts. The demonization of Anthony Fauci, which has become a cottage industry, has been from the beginning about deflecting away from Donald Trump's horrific mismanagement of COVID from the beginning. And so you see people fundraising off demonizing Anthony Fauci and all sorts of conspiracy theories emerging. I think the point is, yes, you do need to call it out. You do need to be clear. You need to make sure you're not responding to ad hominem attacks with ad hominem attacks, but root it in real facts. And then you really need to take the additional leap, which is to say, look, we're going to call this stuff out. We're going to talk to you like adults. We're going to use statistics and science, realizing that some folks may be deep in the grip of this disinformation industrial complex, but we're not going to let that tail wag the dog in the national conversation right now. And we can have real criticisms that are substantive and fact-based without falling into this partisan nonsense that makes us all insane in addition to the virus we're dealing with.
John, Essie, thank you both.
Thank you
very much for that.